In this video, I'm going to show you how to take back control of your own data by replacing Google Drive and Google Docs with your own cloud. The platform that we're going to use for this video is Nextcloud, and so without further ado, let's jump right into it. The things that you will need for this tutorial is access to a public domain that you control, access to your firewall so that you can configure your ports and port forwarding, and a Linux machine with Docker installed. So the first thing that we need is we need to create 2 A records on your public domain. Here I'm logged into Namecheap, and Namecheap is just the platform that I use to manage all my domains. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to use gameexplicit.com as the domain for this example. To add DNS records in Namecheap, you click on domain list, you click on your domain, and then you click on advanced DNS, and then you scroll down and you will see host records. Here under host records, as you can see, I already created the cloud one and the Collabora one. To create a new one, you just click on add new record. You choose A as the type of record, and then you type cloud, and then here you type the public IP of your home router or your home firewall. If you don't know what's your IP, then you can always just do a quick Google search and then look for what'smyip.com, and this will tell you what's your public IP. You will see it here, and then you just grab that and then you put it in your record, and then you just click on save changes. Cloud is going to be used for the general access for Nextcloud, and Collabora is a platform that will replace Google Docs. Now that we have our DNS records all up and running, now it's time to go to the Linux machine. Okay, so here I am in my Linux machine. This is just a Rocky 9.3 VM with Docker already installed. It has Docker and Docker Compose. So if you don't know how to do that, I have another video that I'm going to leave up here to install Docker on Rocky. So the first thing that we're going to set up here is our nginx reverse proxy. I'm going to create a new folder in OPT. I'm going to create a new folder called Docker. So the first container that we're going to create here is the nginx-proxy. So mkdir nginx-proxy. We're going to go inside of this with Vim or Nano or your favorite text editor. We're going to create a new docker compose.yml file. We're going to press escape, set paste, enter, and then we're going to click I for insert. This is to avoid wrong formatting when copying and pasting commands. Here I'm going to paste my reverse proxy configuration. I'll explain it really quickly. So we have an nginx-proxy container version 1.4. Name of the container nginx-proxy. We have all the folders that it needs to connect to. We also need to map the Docker socket. This is to create dynamic nginx configuration for each of our domains. Here we're going to define a couple of things. First, we need a static IP for our reverse proxy. I'll explain that a little bit later once we have Nextcloud up and running. Here we're going to define front-end network, and the IP address that we're going to give to our reverse proxy is 172.19.0.2. Restart unless stop. It means that the container will restart unless we manually stop it. Now, the second component of the reverse proxy is one of my favorite ones, is the acme-companion. This is a let's encrypt container that will automatically generate SSL certificates for all of the domains that are going to go through the nginx proxy here. So the only thing that you need to add here is, as environment for the default email, you need to add a valid email address. Here I put my personal email address, but you can put any email address that you have access to. We're going to use the acme-companion version 2.2.10, and also here's just the name of the container. The acme-companion needs access to the nginx proxy volumes, so that's why here we're giving access to the acme container to all the nginx proxy volumes, meaning all of these ones that are here on top. As you can see, this needs to match this, and then you're good to go. Now, for the purpose of the acme-companion, we also need volumes for itself. So we're going to have a cert volume and acme volume for the script, and we also need to give it access to the Docker socket. Here, we're going to define the same network. They need to be able to communicate in the same network. So that's why we're defining the front-end network. For the acme-companion, we don't need a static IP, so we're just going to leave it like that, and it will be assigned a DHCP IP from the Docker network. If we scroll all the way down, here is where we are going to define our front-end network. So we're just going to say networks, front-end, the type of network that we want, in this case is bridge, and we're going to configure what is the subnet and what is the gateway for this network. With that already in place, we can save and quit. Now we're going to navigate one folder back, and okay, perfect. So, oh, I made a mistake. Our nginx-proxy folder is actually outside of the Docker folder. So we're going to just move nginx-proxy to the Docker folder. Okay, so now if we navigate to the Docker folder, nginx-proxy is there. So now we're going to create the folder for our Nextcloud configuration. So same process as before, mkdir nextcloud, perfect. we go into Nextcloud and we're going to create another docker compose.yml file. Okay, we do the same, escape colon, set paste, enter, and then I to insert. And now we're going to copy the Nextcloud configuration. Real quick explanation before we put everything up and running. Services, Nextcloud, that's our main Nextcloud container. We're using the Linux IO server image. I chose version 28.0. Container name, Nextcloud. This is an important part. This is where we are going to configure our environment. The two things that are important here is your virtual host and your Let's Encrypt host. Here we're going to put the domain that we register, in my case that I register with Namecheap. This will enable the reverse proxy to listen for this URL, and it also will enable the acme-companion to generate a certificate with this specific name. This is how the reverse proxy is able to talk to this container and know that it needs to redirect all the HTTPS traffic to this container. These two options are very important. Make sure that it matches your domain and your configuration. PUID, PGID, that's just local users. There's not much to do there. And time zone, just put the time zone that corresponds to your time zone. So here we're going to connect our container to the nginx-proxy front-end network so that the reverse proxy can talk to our Nextcloud container. We're also going to define a second network called a backend network. And this backend network is isolated network inside our Docker environment that will enable the Nextcloud connector to communicate with the database without exposing any of this communication outside of your local network, even outside of your Docker network. So we're going to just define it as backend for now. For our Nextcloud volumes, we're going to have one volume for the configuration and one volume for your data. So for this data volume, make sure that you share your biggest storage in your server so that you have access to all your storage through Nextcloud. In this case, I'm just choosing a local folder right here in the same folder as our container, just for the purposes of this video. But you would need to change this to suit your needs. Same policy as always, restart unless stop. Down here, we have our second container. Our second container is our database. Nextcloud already comes with a light SQL database built into it. But as you know, or maybe you don't, this database is not recommended for general use or for production use because it's not very efficient and it's also not able to host big files. So if we're using Nextcloud as our own cloud to store all of our data, we need a more powerful database. So that's why we have a MariaDB database container here. Same source, linuxserver.io, MariaDB container, version 10.11. I just grabbed the latest at the moment of the recording of this video. Container name, you can choose whatever you want. MariaDB is fine. It's easy to recognize. PUID and PGID, same thing. It's just the local user on your Linux machine that is going to be running the container. Time zone, just choose yours. And here for MySQL environment, this is a way for you to manage the username and password so that they're not in plain text on your YML configuration file. So what this is doing is just setting up the environment variables to another variable. These variables, we're going to configure them right after this. They're going to be stored in a file separately in our Linux machine. All you need to know is that these variables need to match to the file that we're going to create. For a database, it's recommended to have a static IP within our Docker network. So this is the same thing as we did previously with the reverse proxy, where we're going to define our network. We're going to call it backend, and we're going to give it a static IP of 172.16.0.10. Now, for the database volumes is fairly easy. It's just one volume that we need to mount, and it's just the database configuration. So this, I just created a dbconf file here, and it's going to be mapped to /config. Our restart policy is the same, restart unless stop, so we're good to go. Here is our last container, and this container is called Collabora. This is the platform that Nextcloud uses to be able to mimic what Google Docs does. So this means having access to Nextcloud Docs for documents, sheets, and slides. And it also enables us to have our own server where we're going to pull all the collaboration tools together. So if we want to collaborate in the same document through our Nextcloud platform, we need to have this Collabora server up and running. Same thing as our Nextcloud container. Here we also need to specify a virtual host and a Let's Encrypt host for both our domain names that we chose. In this case, is collabora.gameexplicit, collabora.gameexplicit.com. The extra configurations that we need to do here is we need to add a virtual port and a virtual Pro 2. So we need to tell our reverse proxy how to communicate with this container. So the custom port that Collabora server uses is 9980, and we need to tell our reverse proxy to communicate with this container via HTTPS. Here we want to give our Collabora server also a static IP. So we're going to give it a static IP on the nginx-proxy frontend network so that it's able to communicate with this Collabora container. The Collabora image that I'm using here, sorry, I forgot to say, is the official Collabora Docker image found on dockerhub.com, and I'm using the version 23.05. So coming back to the network, now we're just going to specify an IP on the subnet of the nginx-proxy front-end network, and our restart policy is going to be the same, restart unless stop. Here at the very bottom, we're going to define our networks for this YAML file. So networks, nginx-proxy frontend, we're going to define it, and we're going to tell it that it's an external network because this network is defined in our reverse proxy YAML file. Here we need to define one other network, which is the backend network. We're going to do the same driver bridge configuration. The subnet is just 172.16 and the gateway is 172.16.0.1. So with all this configured, now we can go ahead and save our file. So escape, write and quit. Okay, so now it's time to configure the database environment variables that I was explaining before. For this, we need to create the folder that we defined in our Docker container here for the database. We're just going to pre-create this folder, dbconf. Exit from here. So we're here on our Nextcloud location. We're going to create a folder, mkdir dbconf. Perfect. And then here we're going to create a file called env. So just vim env. Now I'm going to paste my values. Here you need to replace pretty much all the values that you're going to see here. So as you can see, my SQL root password, my SQL database, my SQL user, and my SQL password. So all of these passwords, I just randomly generated them. And I just made sure that the variables here matches what we have in our configuration file. Take note of these values because we're going to use these values when we're going to set up Nextcloud. We can save and quit from this one. Okay, so now we're ready to run our nginx reverse proxies. First, let's navigate to our nginx proxy. Perfect. And here we're going to do docker compose up-d to run it as a daemon in the background. Enter. Okay, it's gonna go ahead and pull all the images. All right, and then if we do docker ps, we can see that our nginx container is up and running. So with the nginx proxy up and running, now it's a good time to go to our firewall and configure our ports. So here I'm going to log in into my unified security gateway. This process might be different from firewall to firewall, but the basic configuration is just a simple port forward. I'm going to click on settings, and then I'm going to click on application firewall. Here I'm going to click on port forwarding, and I'm going to, I already created them, but I'll show you how to create them. You will click on create. You will put whatever name you want to call it here. It can be nginx 80 or whatever you like. And we're going to do from any on port 80. And we're going to put the IP of our virtual machine. So if we go back to our virtual machine here real quickly, we're going to type nmcli, and this will tell us what is the IP of our VM right here. So we need to grab that, put it here, and then we're going to choose the port that we want to forward. In this case, is 80, and the protocol is TCP. And I suggest you turn on logging if this is a feature of your firewall so that you can have a log of everything that goes through that port. Now, why do we need port 80 if we're using HTTPS? Well, basically, port 80 is what the Acme container is going to use to communicate with the Let's Encrypt API so that it can generate certificates automatically for you. So this is required for this setup. And our second port is going to be 443. This is regular HTTPS traffic. Same thing, port enabled from any. Which port do we want to forward? And then where do we want to forward it? In this case, our VM. What is the forward port? It's 443. And the protocol is TCP, and I strongly suggest you enable logging. So once this is done, we're done with the firewall configuration. You just need to wait for your firewall to provision and you should be good to go. So now that we have this up and running, let's go and start our Nextcloud container. We're gonna go back and then we're going to go to Nextcloud. Same thing, we're here on the Nextcloud folder. All right, we need to move this m file to our db.conf. So the m file needs to be inside the db.conf here. Just gonna open it again just to make sure that everything looks good. Yeah, perfect. Now we'll do docker compose up-d. Same thing, is going to pull all our container images. This is our Nextcloud, our MariaDB, and our Collabora image, and pull them from the dockerhub.com website and just start our containers. With our Nextcloud container up and running, now we can navigate to our public domain name and we should be greeted with the Nextcloud website. My URL is cloud.gameexplicit.com, and as you can see, our Nextcloud instance is up and running, and it's also running with SSL certificates automatically generated by Let's Encrypt. How awesome is this? And also the Acme container, it will automatically renew your certificates, so you don't even have to think about it anymore. As you can see here, the connection is secure, certificate is valid, and if we open the certificate, it was issued today and it expires in 3 months. So in that 3 months period, the Acme container is going to renew this certificate. So this is the part where we create our admin account and we set up the database. Here we're going to click on storage and database. For our data folder, we're going to choose /data. This is because if we open again our Docker Compose, if you remember correctly, this is our /data here on our configuration file. So for that, we can leave it as /data. For the type of database that we want to use MariaDB. So we're going to click on MariaDB and we're going to be greeted with some credentials that we need to fill out. So these credentials are the ones that we set up in the environment file. If we go back to our environment file here real quickly, let's close this up. We're going to go into our db-conf folder. Let's clear that out. And we're going to open our environment file. So here we have our credentials. This is what we need to copy and paste into our Nextcloud setup. First, we're going to choose an admin account for the Nextcloud. This has nothing to do with the database, just a plain admin account. So I'm just going to choose admin, create a password. Now, database user. So database user, we want to use our MySQL user. So in this case, it's admin. So database user is our admin. And database password is going to be MySQL password. So we're going to choose that. Database name, we're going to choose the name that we gave it to our database. In this case, it's just cloud main. You can choose whatever you want. Database name. And now for the database host, this is why we set up a static IP on our database container. So if we open again our Docker Compose, remember that we gave our database static IP. So in this case, this is the host that we need to set up here on our Nextcloud database configuration as the database host. Once all of this is done, we're just going to click on install. Here is where it's going to ask us to install all the recommended apps. You can either skip this or you can click on install recommended apps. For this tutorial, I'm going to click on install recommended apps and it's going to go ahead and install everything into our Nextcloud setup. So now it's finished setting up all the apps and everything, and we're greeted with the Nextcloud dashboard. Okay, so with this, now you have Nextcloud configured on your server, up and running and working. Now there's a few things that we need to configure to make this 100% secure and 100% ready for production. As you can see here, we're going to go to the admin panel, so administration settings. And as you can see, we're going to have a couple of security warnings here telling us that there's still some work to do. To address all of these issues, we're going to go back to our nginx configuration and we're going to configure our nginx-proxy and our Nextcloud for production. First, let's bring down both our containers. So the Nextcloud one, so Docker Compose down. Okay, now we're going to go back to our nginx-proxy 2, nginx-proxy, Docker Compose down. All right. So everything is down. Now we're going to go back to our Nextcloud folder. First, we're going to configure the config.php file from Nextcloud. This will enable us to whitelist our nginx proxy and also to tell it to use HTTPS as the protocol to override all the connections. This is because when we're running Nextcloud behind an nginx proxy or a reverse proxy, the communication between the proxy and Nextcloud is being done through HTTP, so unsecured. So you might encounter some issues when you're requesting a secure link or a secure URL and it's actually going through an HTTP protocol. We're going to go to config. We're going to go to www. We're going to go to Nextcloud. We're going to go to config again. So this is the full path. As you can see, we have a config.php file here. We're going to open it and edit it with our favorite text editor. So we already have a couple of populated settings that this was automatically done when we did the initial setup. So here we need to add a couple of things. I'm just going to copy and paste this ones. First thing that we want to configure here is we're going to whitelist our reverse proxy. I'm just going to add a second line right below secrets. And I'm going to add trusted proxies and I'm just going to go back here, make it nice. This needs to match the static IP that you set up on your nginx configuration file. We're going to go down here and at the end of override CLI URL, we're going to add a new line and we're going to paste the following. The settings that we have here is override host and override protocol. So override host, we're just going to add the host that you chose for your Nextcloud. And override protocol, we're going to choose HTTPS to make sure that all connections go through HTTPS. For the Nextcloud side, this is the only thing that we need to configure. Now we're going to go back to our nginx-proxy because there's a couple things that we need to configure here. So we're going to go to Docker and then we'll do nginx-proxy. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into the config folder. So .config folder, let me clear that out. So here we have a default nginx configuration file. You should not touch this nginx configuration file because this configuration file gets dynamically built and overwritten every time you start the container. Additionally to the default configuration file, it also has the ability to read other custom configuration files. And for this, we're going to add a special configuration file that we need to be able to upload large files to our Nextcloud. Okay, so the configuration file that we want to create here is we're going to create a new one. The name is going to be uploadlimit.conf. So we open that, I for insert, and we're going to copy the following. So basically, this what it enables is client max body size equals 0, means unlimited. So you can upload whatever file size that you want. And the client body timeout, this is 120 seconds. If you have a really big file, let's say like 10 gigs or something like that, sometimes the HTTP connection might time out if it takes too long to finish. We're going to save this, so write and quit. So our upload size configuration is good. So now we need to add additional proxy configurations, one for a Nextcloud container and another one for our Collabora container so that it works 100%. So we're going to go back here on our nginx, and now we're going to navigate to our vhost file. So our vhost file here, these are custom configurations that will only apply to our specific hosts or specific containers that we want to. First, we're going to create one for our cloud.gameexplicit.com. This is our Nextcloud containers. We're just going to create a new file, and this file needs to match the domain name or the domain URL that you're using for your container. This tells the reverse proxy to which host to apply this configuration. So we're just going to vim cloud.gameexplicit.com. And we're going to hit enter to open that. We click on I for insert, and we're going to copy the following. This configuration is for Nextcloud to be able to pass through or proxy pass through some of the apps that are not able to go 100% through the reverse proxy. Just put this in and then just save your configuration. Now we're going to create another one for our Collabora container. This one is a little bit more complex because it needs to communicate through a different HTTPS port. So that's why we need this. So we're going to do the same. We're going to do vim collabora.gameexplicit.com. Open the file, I for insert, and we're going to put the following. Okay, so I'll explain really quickly what this enables us. Here is the same thing. We're going to do a proxy pass of a couple of things. So first of all, just the browser location is going to be https collabora.gameexplicit.com. You don't need to change that. But for the WOP, the capabilities, the main WebSocket, and the download presentation, image upload, and admin console WebSocket, this needs to be redirected through the local Docker network for it to work properly. So basically, anything that is browsable is going to go through the reverse proxy, and anything that is API or specifically to Collabora, it's going to go through the local network of Docker, and it's going to use the proprietary port here. Just make sure that you have this configuration here, and just make sure that your container IP matches, and you should be good to go. So now we're going to write and quit to save that. And now we're ready to bring back our containers. So we're going to start with nginx container. So we're going to go back here, a couple folders. We're going to go docker compose up-d, bring that up. Now we're going to go to our Nextcloud container. Same thing, docker compose up-d. So all our containers are up and running. Now I'm just going to do a refresh. Gonna check again for security issues. Let's see if everything is good. Okay, so we still have a couple of warnings. These warnings you don't need to be concerned with. These are just settings that need to be configured, and it's just telling us that it has 13 errors on the logs since February 4th. So this is just basically telling you that there were some errors, but those errors were generated because we didn't have the configuration previously. So now let's do a quick test of our Nextcloud instance. So if we go back to files, so here you can find some files that already come with Nextcloud. Let's try and upload our own files. Okay, so I'm just going to upload one of my videos here real quickly to the Nextcloud instance. This is a 111 megabyte file. You can just drag and drop and it will start your upload. And as you can see really quickly, no issues, no limit on the upload size that you need to upload, so everything is good there. Let's see if the collaboration tools are working. So to do that, we need to first configure our server. So if we go to the administration settings again, we go all the way down here and then we choose Nextcloud Office. Here it's going to tell you that it's not able to find the server, but this is because it's trying to look for the same server, but we're going to specify our own server. So in this case, we need to untick this. We remove this and then we type HTTPS collabora.gameexplicit.com. And if you want to test this before we actually hit save, you can open a new tab and then go to this. And as you can see, the Collabora server is up and running. It's just telling us that everything is okay. You can also check that this connection is also secured by SSL. Same thing. Our nginx container is generating an SSL configuration automatically, and it gave us a certificate. So once this is done, you just click on save and you should have a Collabora server is reachable. Remember the initial configuration that we did on our nginx portal here. If we go back to nginx and then we go to vhost, we added this collabora.gameexplicit file. If we open it really quickly again, and then we just try to do, for example, hosting/discovery, we go back here and then on our Collabora server, we just add this at the end and then we hit enter. You should be able to see all of this XML configuration file here. So if you're not able to see this, is because this part of the configuration is not working properly. Once that's done, you have a fully featured, fully functional Nextcloud instance hosted in your own house. So let's do a quick test now that we have our Collabora server online. So if we go back here to files, then we're going to create a new file and we'll just choose new Word document. Blank document is fine. Click on create. Okay, our new document is created. Now we're just going to open it. And as you can see, our Collabora Online Development Edition is up and running. So we can go ahead and just create our documents, no problem. And if someone else joins this session or joins your server, he's going to be able to write and type with you and collaborate on these documents. All of this self-hosted by yourself using open source software. So I find that this is a great way to take back ownership of your data. You don't have Google looking at all your files, reading everything that is in there, looking at your pictures. And I understand that Google might do this so that they can have data on you, so that they can provide you with better advertisement. But if you want to take back control of your data, this is one of the best ways I've found to do so. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.